Crossroad Blues. The crunch of tires on gravel filled the night, and the quiet disappeared, quickly forgotten. Before the car had turned the bend, the headlights had illuminated the trees each side of the road. Darkness was replaced by light, but not color, just a pallid interpretation of the greens and browns that existed in the daytime. Yet the night was not insipid. Seb could taste it on his tongue. As the lights moved, so did the shadows that danced a macabre waltz. He looked up, but did not move. His outer calmness had an inner turmoil. His fist clenched tightly. He could feel the pain from his bruised back and his swollen eye, which he hoped would go unnoticed in the dark. Inside he felt excitement, nervousness, and a touch of fear. His earlier anger and pain were gone, replaced by biting anticipation. He fought the urge to stand up and welcome. He did not want to seem too eager. The car slowed to a stop in front of him. Seb didn't recognize the make. He was generally good with cars, but this was not one he'd seen before. It certainly wasn't modern. It was a big vehicle, very long, with an ornate hood ornament. 2 silver wings opened majestically above a raging fire. The car was silver, polished and glistening, possessing a ghostly luminescence in the darkness. Seb had to squint. His eyes had not yet adjusted to the wan twilight of the car's headlight. Nothing happened for a few moments. The car's engine idled, the lights still on. Seb fidgeted slightly. His mouth was dry, and his palms had begun to feel clammy. The minutes stretched out like a disused runway. Finally, his cool collapsed. He leaned forward to peer into the car. The interior was dark, although he thought he could see a person in the driver's seat. He sat still, staring forward past the steering wheel and beyond to the road before him. He was but a chauffeur, carrying a traveler. The low growl of the engine stopped suddenly, and the night became deathly quiet. He hadn't realized how all-encompassing the sound had been, but now the silence seemed louder. It was invasive, savage, and penetrating. It started to feel like his intestines themselves were sweating. There was another long pause. The figure, if it was a man and not some trick of the shadows, remained unmoving, staring forward with sinister professionalism. Seb felt a cold trickle move slowly down his back, following the ridges of his spine. He was also aware of the sweat on his brow, although he felt no heat. Presently, there was a slight whirring sound, little more than a whisper, and the rear window rolled down. Seb almost jumped, startled by the sudden movement. He shifted on his feet and moved closer. He felt soiled and more than a little grubby, certainly unworthy. He had to fight the urge to wipe his hands down his jeans. "Pretty late to be standing in the middle of nowhere in the dark," a voice said from the dark interior. It was a deep voice, canorous and impressive, a head teacher seducing a student. Seb didn't respond. He couldn't. His voice caught at the back of his throat and refused to come out. "Nice place, though," the stranger continued. "In the daytime, I bet there's lots of green. Trees, bushes, grasses, ferns, lots of beauty. A place for picnics and joviality. Children running wildly, dogs chasing sticks. A spot for families to come." Seb nodded. The man moved closer to the window, and for the first time Seb could see his outline. He was obviously a large man, and Seb got the impression he was also very wealthy. There was just something about the way he spoke. But at night, the voice became energized. Places like this, intersecting paths, roads, walkways, crossroads. They are very powerful. At night, they come alive with possibilities, with futures and, on occasion, pasts. "Why?" Seb blurted. He resisted the compulsion to look around to see who it was that had spoken. The sound of his own voice startled him. "Glad you could join the conversation, Seb." Seb was stunned that the stranger would know his name. They had never met, he was sure of that. He would have remembered this voice if he had heard it before. It would be the voice that narrated his nightmares. "It's like this, my boy," the voice continued without missing a beat. "You walk through life following whatever path is in front of you. You know where you are going because the path takes you there. And if you don't know, it doesn't matter, because you will eventually get there anyway. However, when you get to a crossroads, you have a decision to make. Some paths can save you, others can condemn you, some can reward you, whilst others can take everything you have, leaving you with nothing but the shirt on your back. Sometimes you will lose that too." He chuckled. "Which will you decide to take? You can't blindly follow the groove if you don't know where you want to go. You might end up not going anywhere at all." Seb nodded, although he wasn't entirely sure he understood. "Do you know who Robert Johnson was, Seb?" The man changed the subject abruptly. "No," Seb replied. Then after a pause, "Sir?" Although he couldn't see the man's face, Seb was sure the stranger smiled at this show of respect. "What type of music do you like? Rock? Metal? Thrash? You don't strike me as a boy band fan. Ever drooled over Little Mix? Ever fiddled Beyoncé?" No, sir, I prefer—" "I know what you like, Seb. I was just tickling your balls." There was an enthusiastic chuckle. "I think you have time for a history lesson. You do, don't you, Seb?" "History?" "History, Seb. The study of things past." "Yes," Seb said in a daze. "You see, all modern music comes from a few penniless black men from the Mississippi. They worked on plantations picking cotton. Tough work, sunrise to sunset. They used to call it kin to kint. You've never had to work that hard, have you, Seb? Ever felt the tickle of sweat in your shorts? Of course not. There were no CDs, no MP3s, or iTunes. People had to make their own entertainment. Drugs, booze, sex, and music, and lots of glorious violence. Good times indeed. One of these men was named Robert Johnson. He was a mediocre talent, if I am to be completely honest, a middling and most uninspiring guitarist at best. He was not content, though, my boy. He wanted to be more. He wanted to be a god. So one night he waited at a crossroads, in the middle of nowhere, not unlike this one. Drawn by the same instincts that brought you here tonight. Like you, he didn't know exactly what to expect. He only knew he had to be there, just like you, tonight. Then at midnight, a car pulls up, kinda like this one. There was a slight movement of his hand, as if to illustrate his story. There was a discussion, some bartering, and a deal was made. Robert became one of the most influential guitarists who ever lived. He became the god he desired to be. Modern music stands on his mighty shoulders. Seb was listening intently, as if some of it may come up in a test later. "What did he have to give in return?" he asked. "Glad you asked." The stranger's voice was suddenly tinged with pernicious glee. "He gave his soul." The last word was drawn out, low and intimately threatening. It brought silence back to the night. Seb frowned. He wasn't a believer in God or the devil or any of that, but if there was some truth to any of it, then giving up your soul for something as cool as becoming a guitar god sounded like a great idea. "I see you don't believe in such things," the stranger continued. "Good on you, Seb. Jump on the sheep and shag the herd of disbelief. That's what I always say." He chuckled quietly. Seb was aware that he had tensed, his muscles rigid with fear, anticipation, and something just beyond his comprehension. It kicked at his gut and pulled at his bowels. The stranger seemed to lean forward, closer to the car window, yet his features still remained hidden. Seb didn't like this. Why couldn't he see this man? So, anywho, here we are. Seb, a young man trying to escape a pretty crappy home life. I am sure you'll excuse my language, just as I am sure you'll agree with me. Seb looked to the floor in shame. This strange man on this strange night seemed to know everything about him. He didn't feel surprise, just guilt, as if he was the only one to blame. You've come out here to this lonely crossroads in the dead of night, afraid of Larry and his, shall we say, vigorous, punitive measures? Afraid of your mother, who never seems to see anything, even when you show her the evidence of your bruised and bloodied face, and afraid of yourself, an angry young man with pent-up frustrations and the spring of bloodlust in your gut. And you want what? Come on, Sebastian, speak up. But Seb couldn't say anything. The bloodlust and the fear the stranger spoke of were coming back to the fore. The fury began to erupt to fiery red magma shooting through his veins. He wanted to go back home and give back to his father exactly what he so regularly dispensed. He wanted to grab his mother's hair and force her to see his bruises and to hear his cries. He wanted someone to taste the bitter sting of his tears. He wanted fire. Yes, the stranger said after a very long moment. You have come out here at this most ungodly of hours, because you were cold here, drawn here. By what? By blood? You want something, just as so many others have over the centuries. You are standing at the crossroads, and you want someone to tell you where to go. I'll give you anything, Seb whispered. He meant it. He knew he was lost. He hadn't been sure, but he was starting to recognize it. There was so much he was afraid of, so much he wanted to do. He had to fight to control it. The stranger laughed lightly. Of course you would, but you have nothing to offer me. But, Seb blurted out. He felt tears stinging his eyes, and his body shuddered. How about that Robert fella? That one you told me about? The stranger's laugh grew louder. He had something to give, Seb. He had something I wanted. Something to trade, but you... He leaned even further through the window. Still, Seb couldn't see much. But now he could see the man's eyes. They were deep red, burning like the fire that Seb felt inside him. You have nothing I don't already have. The stranger's laugh bellowed in the darkness. He leaned back into the car, and the window began to close. The engine roared back to life, and the car began to slowly move away. But what about me? Seb called. Over the sound of the car engine, the stranger's laughter could still be heard. His voice belonged to the night itself. Go home, the voice called. It echoed amongst the trees, off the asphalt, and the obsidian black sky. The path has been chosen. Go home, Seb, and unleash the fire. We'll meet again. The car disappeared into the night, a ghost fading into the ether, but the laughter remained in Seb's memory, where it would live and fester and bleed. The oppressive quiet of the countryside returned, but inside Seb's mind there was a roar. The dark turned to red, and he began his slow walk home.